In today's story, we embark on an emotional journey with Clarissa, a 35-year-old widow who stumbles upon a mysterious phone number left behind by her late husband, Ethan. Driven by grief and an insatiable curiosity, she decides to make a video call to the unfamiliar number, setting off a chain of events that will uncover secrets, challenge her perceptions, and reveal unexpected connections. Through encounters with strangers and friends alike, this story explores themes of compassion, empathy, and the profound ways in which love can manifest itself even in the face of tragedy. As we dive deeper into Clarissa's world, we will explore how her determination to find closure leads to surprising discoveries about Ethan's past and a newfound sense of purpose. Join us as we unravel a tale of loss, healing, and the resilience of the human spirit. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotionally gripping narratives. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below sharing your favorite inspiring quote on love or resilience. How about something like, "Love and truth always find a way, even through the darkest moments." Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. The story of Clarissa begins with a moment many can relate to, a seemingly ordinary day that takes an unexpected turn. It was a rainy afternoon in New Charleston, a small coastal town where the sea breeze carries with it stories of the past. The town had seen many things, but nothing could have prepared Clarissa for what was about to unfold. At just 35 years old, Clarissa was already a widow. Her husband, Ethan, had passed away in a tragic motorcycle accident just 6 months ago, leaving her in a world that felt suddenly too vast, too empty, and too silent. Each corner of their apartment seemed to echo his absence, the emptiness permeating the once warm and lively space. Clarissa had spent the months after Ethan's passing in a kind of fog, navigating through the daily motions but feeling disconnected from the world around her. She kept everything in the apartment exactly as Ethan had left it, not out of hope that he might return, but because she felt as if she were preserving a piece of him, keeping his memory alive. The books on the shelf, the jacket on the chair, and the lingering scent of his cologne all served as quiet reminders of the life they once shared. The couple had been married for 7 years, and although their journey together was full of love, it was also marked by deep heartache. For years, they had tried to have a child, enduring the ups and downs of fertility treatments and dashed hopes. But just before Ethan's accident, they had finally taken steps toward adopting a little girl, a child who was to be the missing piece of their lives. His untimely death not only stole him away from Clarissa, but it also put an abrupt end to their dream of starting a family. One day, as Clarissa resolved to finally begin sorting through Ethan's belongings in his study, a task she had been avoiding, she stumbled upon something strange. There, amidst the clutter of receipts, bills, and handwritten notes, was a slip of paper with a phone number scrawled on it. It was written in Ethan's handwriting, which she recognized all too well. Yet, the number itself did not seem familiar, and there was no name or explanation written alongside it. For a moment, she considered dismissing it as just another irrelevant detail in the avalanche of paperwork that she had yet to process. But something about the number stirred a restlessness in her, a curiosity, an unanswered question. Why had Ethan kept this number? And why had he hidden it in a place where she was unlikely to find it, at least until now? The questions began to multiply in her mind, breeding more questions, pushing her to confront a part of herself that wanted to believe she knew everything about the man she had loved so deeply. It was this blend of grief, curiosity, and perhaps a faint hope of finding some hidden message from Ethan that compelled Clarissa to dial the number. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for, but she felt as if this number might hold some kind of key, even if it was a small one, to help her unlock the next chapter of her life. She hesitated before pressing the call button. As the phone began to ring, a flood of doubt washed over her. Was this really a good idea? What if she uncovered something that would only add to her grief? Her thoughts were interrupted when the call connected. On the other end, the ringing stopped abruptly, replaced by the crackle of a poor connection. There was a slight delay, and then a woman's voice answered. "Hello, who is this?" The voice was young, uncertain, but familiar enough to suggest that whoever was on the other line had not expected this call. Clarissa felt a chill crawl down her spine. She hadn't anticipated someone actually picking up, let alone a woman whose tone carried a weight that was hard to decipher. For a moment, she froze, uncertain of what to say or how to explain herself. "My name is Clarissa," she finally managed, her voice faltering slightly. "I found this number. It was with some of my husband's things. She stopped short, not quite sure how to continue without sounding intrusive. The silence that followed was heavy, as though both women were holding their breath. Then, almost as if releasing a long-held secret, the woman on the other end spoke softly. Ethan was a good man." There was a tremor in her voice that Clarissa couldn't ignore. The words hung in the air, each one landing with a weight that seemed to grow heavier by the second. She had no idea who this person was or how she knew her late husband, but there was an unmistakable familiarity in the way she spoke his name, as though he had been an important part of her life too. This revelation sent a shiver through Clarissa. Her mind raced with 100 thoughts, most of them dark, some of them desperate. Was this woman a secret part of Ethan's life? Did she know something Clarissa did not? Could there be a hidden chapter of Ethan's story that was just now beginning to unravel before her eyes? It was in that moment of uncertainty that Clarissa felt a strange mix of betrayal and hope. Betrayal at the thought that her husband might have kept secrets from her, and hope that there was more to Ethan's life than she had known, something that could help her understand his sudden departure. The woman introduced herself as Beatrice, a 28-year-old who seemed hesitant to share much at first. She mentioned that she had met Ethan during a difficult time in her life, but was vague about the details. The way she spoke, with a certain raw emotion that came through even over the phone, made it clear that whatever connection she had to Ethan, it was significant. As the conversation continued, Beatrice revealed that she was pregnant, a fact that left Clarissa momentarily speechless. The implications were overwhelming, and her mind was quick to jump to conclusions, none of which offered any comfort. But before she could voice her thoughts, Beatrice clarified, "It's not what you think. The child isn't Ethan's." The relief was immediate, but it came mingled with confusion and a new wave of questions. If this child wasn't Ethan's, then what exactly was his role in Beatrice's life? Why had he kept her a secret from Clarissa? There was a mystery here, and it went deeper than she had expected when she first dialed that number. Clarissa's curiosity quickly shifted to a determination to find out the truth. She needed answers, not just to satisfy her own lingering doubts, but to fully comprehend the kind of person her husband was beyond the roles of husband and soon-to-be adoptive father. There was a part of his life that she had never been privy to, and with Beatrice now at the center of this enigma, Clarissa resolved to meet her in person. If there was a story here, it needed to be told. Stay tuned for more as the story unfolds, revealing deeper truths, untold connections, and the power of healing in the most unexpected circumstances. Make sure to subscribe for more and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps bring stories like this to life. Clarissa's journey of grief began the moment she learned about Ethan's tragic motorcycle accident. It was a cold evening in New Charleston when the knock came on her door, and two solemn-faced officers delivered the devastating news. Her world shattered in an instant, and the person she was, the life she lived, and the future she had imagined were all irreparably changed. The love of her life was gone, and with him went the dreams they had cherished together, including the one that was almost within reach, the adoption of a little girl who would have completed their family. The days following Ethan's death blurred into a series of monotonous, hollow routines. Clarissa barely had the energy to get out of bed, let alone confront the overwhelming sense of loss that loomed over her. Friends and family tried to comfort her, offering words of solace, but their well-meaning attempts often felt hollow, unable to bridge the gap between sympathy and her lived reality. How could they possibly understand the depths of her despair when she herself struggled to grasp it? There were moments when she wondered if she was even grieving correctly, as if there were a proper way to mourn the loss of one's soulmate. Keeping Ethan's belongings exactly as they were became a coping mechanism. a way to maintain a semblance of control amidst the chaos of her emotions. She couldn't bear to move his things, fearing that even the smallest change would erase more of his presence from the apartment. The jacket he had left draped over the chair, the half-read book on his nightstand, and the spare key to his motorcycle, all these objects took on a profound significance. They were more than just possessions. They were pieces of the life they had built together. Reminders that he had existed, that he had loved her, and that once, not so long ago, he had been here. The unfulfilled adoption only added to the weight of her sorrow. She and Ethan had been so close to finally becoming parents after years of fertility treatments, consultations with specialists, and failed attempts. When the agency called to confirm their application was being placed on hold due to Ethan's death, it felt as though the universe itself was conspiring against her happiness. The little girl they had planned to adopt remained an unanswered prayer, a dream that faded with each passing day. Clarissa's grief was compounded by the loss of the child she had already begun to love in her heart, even before she had met her. In an attempt to escape the crushing silence of the apartment, she took long walks along the New Charleston coastline. The rhythmic crashing of the waves brought her a strange kind of comfort, as if the ocean's endless ebb and flow mirrored the tidal waves of her grief. It was during one of these solitary walks that she realized she could no longer continue living as if Ethan might walk through the door at any moment. If she truly wanted to heal, she had to face the reality of his absence, and that meant sorting through his belongings, a task she had been postponing for months. The decision to organize Ethan's office was not an easy one. Every time she entered the room, she was confronted with his life's work, the sketches, blueprints, and notes he had left behind from his architectural projects. As an architect, Ethan had poured his creativity and soul into every design, and the unfinished projects were a stark reminder of the life he would never complete. The room felt sacred, like a time capsule holding the essence of who Ethan was: meticulous, passionate, and endlessly curious about the world. Clarissa spent hours going through his things, each item bringing back a memory that felt like a gentle caress or a sharp pang, depending on the day. It was in the midst of this emotional excavation that she found the slip of paper with the phone number, tucked away in a drawer filled with miscellaneous items. At first, it seemed out of place. Why would Ethan have kept such a random number? And why hadn't he mentioned it to her? The questions came faster than she could answer, and before she knew it, curiosity had led her to make the fateful video call. After the conversation with Beatrice, the grief that had become a part of Clarissa's daily existence seemed to take on a new dimension. It wasn't just about missing Ethan anymore. It was about reconciling the life they had shared with the possibility that there were things she had never known about him. She began to wonder if she had been mourning an incomplete picture of who Ethan really was. As painful as it was, this uncertainty forced her to confront not just the loss of her husband, but the complex reality of his life and the relationships he had formed outside their marriage. Clarissa found herself torn between anger and guilt. On the one hand, there was the anger at the thought that Ethan might have kept secrets from her, something that felt like a betrayal of the trust they had built over 7 years of marriage. On the other hand, she felt guilty for questioning the memory of a man who was no longer around to explain himself. It was an inner conflict that left her feeling even more isolated, as if she were drifting farther away from the shore of understanding. Yet, there was a small, persistent voice within her that suggested perhaps the truth, whatever it turned out to be, could help her heal. If Ethan had indeed played a significant role in Beatrice's life, then learning about that part of him could provide closure, not just for Clarissa, but for the other people who had been touched by his kindness. She wondered if there was some way to bring meaning to the pain, to transform her grief into something that could help others, just as Ethan might have done if he were still alive. The possibility of meeting Beatrice in person began to take shape as more than just a quest for answers. It became a way for Clarissa to reconnect with the world. It was a step toward facing her fears and opening herself up to the unknown. She realized that healing from grief wasn't about forgetting or moving on. It was about finding new ways to remember, to honor the past, and to build a life that acknowledges both the love and the loss. The journey through grief is different for everyone, but Clarissa's story illustrates how facing the darkness head-on, even when it feels unbearable, can be the first step toward finding light again. In her search for answers, she was also searching for herself, the part of her that had been lost in the aftermath of Ethan's death. The process of sorting through his belongings, making that video call, and contemplating the meeting with Beatrice were all part of a path that was leading her toward a deeper understanding of what it means to live, to love, and to let go. Clarissa's grief was not something that could be neatly resolved, nor was it a process with a definitive end. It was an ongoing journey, marked by moments of clarity and waves of sorrow. But with each step she took toward uncovering the truth about Ethan's connection to Beatrice, she was also taking a step toward healing her own heart. Now we continue to explore how Clarissa's path unfolds as she bravely confronts her fears and uncovers truths that will redefine her understanding of Ethan, herself, and the world around her. Before Ethan's tragic accident, Clarissa and he had been on the verge of realizing a long-cherished dream, becoming parents. The couple had spent years struggling with infertility, enduring a series of treatments, consultations, and disappointments. For 7 long years, they had faced the highs and lows together, always hoping that one day, their love would manifest into the child they so deeply desired. But as the years went by, they grew to accept that perhaps their path to parenthood would not be a biological one. After much reflection, they decided to explore adoption. It was a decision that brought with it a renewed sense of hope and purpose. The idea of giving a child a loving home seemed to fill the empty spaces in their hearts. And it wasn't long before they had begun the rigorous adoption process. The paperwork, home visits, and interviews, though demanding, felt worthwhile. They saw it as an investment in their future, a labor of love that would eventually lead them to the child who would complete their family. Ethan had always been particularly excited about the idea of adoption. He had a generous spirit and often spoke about how every child deserves a loving home. The prospect of providing that to a little girl filled him with a sense of joy that Clarissa had not seen in him in a long time. It was as though preparing for the arrival of this child breathed new life into their relationship, rekindling the excitement and closeness that can sometimes fade in the wake of hardship. The couple was in the final stages of the process when Ethan's accident happened. They had already been matched with a little girl, a 3-year-old named Emily, who had captured their hearts even before they met her. Her caseworker had described her as bright and spirited, a child with a resilience that stood out even among the other children waiting for families. Clarissa and Ethan had spent hours imagining what it would be like to bring Emily home, to hear her laughter fill the quiet spaces of their apartment, and to finally experience the joy of being parents. The accident put an abrupt and heartbreaking end to those plans. In the days following Ethan's death, Clarissa received a call from the adoption agency. The caseworker, who had always been so encouraging and supportive, now had a tone of regret. She explained with as much compassion as she could that given the circumstances, Clarissa's adoption application would need to be paused indefinitely. The agency could not proceed with the placement under such uncertain conditions, especially considering the significant life changes that Clarissa was facing. That phone call was like a second loss for Clarissa. It felt as though she had lost not just Ethan, but the future they had been so close to embracing. The dream of parenthood, the anticipation of holding Emily in her arms, vanished in an instant, leaving behind a void that seemed too deep to fill. She couldn't help but feel as though fate had cruelly ripped away the happiness that was finally within reach. In her darkest moments, she questioned whether she was ever meant to be a mother, or if some unseen force had deemed her unworthy of the family she had longed for. Grieving for Ethan was an all-consuming experience, but mourning the loss of Emily was a different kind of sorrow. It was a grief mingled with regret and what-ifs, a painful awareness that a child who could have been a part of her life was now out of reach. Clarissa knew that Emily was somewhere out there, continuing her life without the parents who had planned to love her. This thought weighed heavily on her heart. She wished she could reach out to Emily, to tell her that she had been loved even before she was known. But the adoption agency's protocols did not allow for such contact. The adoption process had been one of the few things keeping Clarissa and Ethan hopeful throughout their journey. It had given them a sense of direction and purpose during those years when uncertainty loomed large. Now that hope felt like a cruel reminder of what could have been, a future that had slipped through their fingers. Clarissa found herself struggling, not just with the loss of her husband, but with the painful reality that her dream of motherhood had been shattered twice over. The joy she had anticipated as a mother was now replaced with a hollow ache that lingered, even on the days when the grief felt slightly less overwhelming. Clarissa's friends tried to console her, reassuring her that she could always start the adoption process again when she was ready. But she wasn't sure if she could endure that emotional roller coaster for a second time. The first journey had taken so much out of her, and now, without Ethan by her side, it seemed impossible. What if she went through all the steps again, only to face another heartbreak? The fear of that possibility was paralyzing, so she kept the dream of adoption in a quiet corner of her heart, unsure if it would ever find its way to the surface again. However, as time went on and her grief began to take different shapes, she started to consider the possibility that perhaps her journey toward motherhood didn't have to be over. The idea didn't come all at once, but rather as a quiet whisper during her moments of reflection. Clarissa thought about how Ethan had believed so deeply in the idea of family, not defined by blood, but by love and commitment. He had always said that being a parent wasn't about genetics. It was about showing up, giving, and loving unconditionally. These words echoed in her heart, reminding her of the kind of parent she could still be, even if it wasn't exactly how she had once imagined. The memories of their preparations to welcome Emily brought a bittersweet sense of warmth and pain. Clarissa found herself going through the things they had bought for the little girl. A small teddy bear Ethan had picked out, a set of picture books, and even a child-sized chair for the dining room. These items, though now untouched and unused, represented the love they had already started to pour into a child they hadn't yet met. She realized that this love hadn't disappeared with Ethan's death. It still existed within her, as a testament to the life they had hoped to share. It was then that she began to see that perhaps there was still room for that dream, even if it took on a new form. Clarissa's renewed resolve wasn't immediate, nor was it linear. There were days when she still doubted whether she could pursue adoption on her own, and other days when the thought brought a glimmer of hope back into her life. It wasn't about replacing Ethan or recreating the past. It was about finding a way to continue living a life that honored the dreams they had shared. She knew that moving forward would require immense strength and courage, but she also knew that if there was anything had taught her, it was to never give up on the things that truly mattered. As Clarissa began to consider her options once more, she couldn't help but think about the mysterious phone call she had made to Beatrice. There was something in the young woman's voice, a rawness that hinted at struggles of her own. It stirred a sense of compassion in Clarissa, a feeling she hadn't experienced since Ethan's death. For the first time in months, she felt a pull to connect with another person's story. It wasn't that she saw Beatrice as a path to finding closure, but rather as someone who might understand what it means to have life's plans derailed so unexpectedly. This shift in Clarissa's heart wasn't about moving on, but about moving forward, finding new ways to live with the grief, rather than being consumed by it. She had lost much, but in that loss, she began to see small fragments of hope that had been buried under her sorrow. Reopening herself to the idea of adoption, or even just the possibility of connecting with Beatrice, represented a step toward rebuilding a life where love and purpose still had a place. The path ahead was uncertain, but for Clarissa, it was enough to know that there was a path at all. We continue now to follow Clarissa as she grapples with these unfolding emotions, seeking to find meaning and connection in the midst of her loss. The journey of healing is not without its twists and turns, and her next steps will bring revelations that challenge her perceptions of Ethan, herself, and the unexpected connections that arise from the most unlikely encounters. The decision to organize Ethan's study was a significant turning point for Clarissa. It had taken months of emotional preparation to finally confront the room that remained just as Ethan had left it. Each time she passed by the closed door, she felt a pang of sorrow mixed with reluctance to disturb the space where Ethan's creative spirit had once thrived. But now it felt necessary, a step toward finding a semblance of closure, or at the very least, a way to move forward in a life she was struggling to navigate alone. Entering the study, Clarissa was immediately surrounded by Ethan's world, the sketches pinned to the walls, stacks of architectural magazines on the shelves, and drafts of his latest projects scattered across the large wooden desk. This room was not merely a workspace. It was a sanctuary where Ethan had poured his passion for design into every drawing and model he created. As an architect, his work reflected a deep understanding of structure, beauty, and the human experience. It was as if each blueprint held a piece of his soul, carefully embedded within the lines and measurements. Clarissa approached the task with a mixture of apprehension and determination. She began by sorting through the piles of paper on his desk, separating drafts from final designs, and discarding notes that seemed incomplete or irrelevant. The work was slow and often interrupted by moments of grief as she stumbled upon a familiar phrase in his handwriting or a reminder of a project he had been particularly excited about. Each discovery felt like a small piece of Ethan that she was letting go, and it was both freeing and painful at the same time. Amidst the countless documents, Clarissa found a drawer filled with miscellaneous items, things Ethan had stored away without much thought. It was here, nestled between a bundle of old receipts and a set of keys she didn't recognize, that she stumbled upon the slip of paper with the phone number. She paused, holding the paper between her fingers, a sense of unease creeping into her thoughts. The number was written in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting, but it seemed out of place. There was no name or explanation attached to it, just the digits staring back at her, as if daring her to uncover their significance. Clarissa debated whether or not to ignore the find. It could easily be a random number someone Ethan had briefly interacted with, perhaps for work, or even a friend she had never met. Yet, something about it felt too deliberate. The way it was tucked away, not quite hidden but also not meant to be easily found, piqued her curiosity. She placed the slip of paper on the desk and continued her task. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the number, nagging at her like a puzzle that demanded to be solved. As she proceeded to go through Ethan's belongings, she discovered other small clues that seemed to suggest there was more to learn about his life than she had previously known. There was a postcard from an unfamiliar city, a few photographs of places she didn't recognize, and even a business card with a name she had never heard of. None of these items on their own were particularly alarming, but together they created a picture that seemed to hint at parts of Ethan's life that she hadn't been privy to. She began to wonder whether these details were connected, or if they were just random remnants of a life filled with various interests and encounters. The photographs were particularly intriguing. One of them showed a quiet street lined with cherry blossom trees, their petals scattered like confetti across the pavement. Another depicted a cozy cafe with outdoor seating, its name written in a foreign language that Clarissa couldn't place. There were no people in the pictures, only scenery, but the angle and composition suggested that they had been taken by someone with an eye for beauty, perhaps Ethan himself. She couldn't recall Ethan ever mentioning visiting these places, nor did she remember seeing these photos among their collection of shared memories. Clarissa's mind raced as she tried to piece together what these small discoveries could mean. Was there an aspect of Ethan's life he had kept private? Or were these simply unrelated fragments of a life that had inevitably included moments she wasn't a part of? It was a question that brought a surge of guilt. She didn't want to think of Ethan as someone who would keep secrets from her, but she also couldn't deny the growing sense of mystery that these clues seemed to represent. It was then that her gaze fell back on the slip of paper with the phone number. She picked it up again, the digits now feeling heavier with significance. Her curiosity intensified, driven by the possibility that this number could hold the answers she was seeking. Despite the uncertainty, Clarissa felt compelled to know more. Perhaps if she called the number, she could get a clearer picture of what these clues were trying to reveal. It was a small hope, but in her state of grief, it felt like a thread worth following. When she finally made the call and heard Beatrice's voice on the other end, it was as though she had opened a door she couldn't easily close. Beatrice's initial hesitation, followed by the cryptic mention of Ethan being a good man, left Clarissa with more questions than answers. The brief conversation had stirred something within her, a need to understand not just the connection between Ethan and Beatrice, but also what role she herself was meant to play in this unfolding story. As the days passed, Clarissa found herself thinking more and more about the conversation. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was an important truth lingering just out of reach, one that she needed to grasp in order to find some measure of peace. But where did she begin? The photographs, the postcard, the business card, and now this phone number all seemed to point in different directions. And yet, there was an underlying sense that they were pieces of the same puzzle, waiting for her to arrange them into a coherent picture. Clarissa decided to revisit Ethan's study to look for more clues. She meticulously examined his calendar, notebooks, and even went through his digital files, hoping to find a connection that would make sense of the items she had found. In one of his notebooks, she came across a series of dates and locations that appeared to correlate with the photographs. The entries were vague, often consisting of only a date and a place, but they provided enough detail for her to see that Ethan had traveled more than she had realized in the past few years. Some of the locations matched the places in the photographs, suggesting that the trips had been significant to him in some way. The discovery of these entries filled her with a bittersweet longing. It was as if she was getting to know a different side of Ethan, one that she hadn't fully understood during their life together. It wasn't a matter of secrecy, necessarily. More like there had been a part of his life that she hadn't been able to share in. It made her realize that even the closest relationships hold some measure of mystery, that no matter how deeply two people know each other, there are always hidden corners in the human heart. Clarissa's exploration of this study not only brought her closer to understanding the circumstances surrounding the mysterious phone number, but it also helped her to reconnect with Ethan in a new way. Each piece of evidence she uncovered seemed to tell a story of a man who was constantly searching for meaning, beauty, and perhaps even purpose. In a strange way, it was comforting to know that he had continued to seek these things up until the very end, as it was a reminder of the kind of person he had always been: curious, compassionate, and driven by a quiet determination to make the world around him a little better. Now, with a collection of clues in hand, Clarissa felt prepared to confront the questions that had emerged. Her conversation with Beatrice had left an indelible mark on her heart, and it was clear that the young woman held a key piece of the puzzle. But what exactly was the nature of Beatrice's connection to Ethan? And how would Clarissa's pursuit of these answers shape the next chapter of her own life? The journey for Clarissa was far from over. With each clue, she took another step deeper into the mystery surrounding her late husband's life. She was prepared to uncover whatever truths lay ahead, no matter how unexpected or challenging they might be. When Clarissa dialed the mysterious number, she was prepared for almost anything except what she actually encountered. The brief conversation she had with Beatrice during that first call had left more questions than answers. It was only the beginning of an unraveling thread that led deeper into a story Clarissa hadn't known she was a part of. Beatrice's voice carried a mix of hesitation and sadness, and the cryptic way she spoke about Ethan made it clear that there was more to the story than a simple acquaintance. Now, with curiosity and a faint hope for understanding driving her, Clarissa resolved to speak with Beatrice face to face. Arranging the meeting was a delicate matter. Beatrice agreed to see her, but the tone of her voice suggested that she, too, was apprehensive about what this encounter might bring. They decided to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of New Charleston, a place where they could speak openly without the prying eyes of others. Clarissa arrived early, the anticipation building with each passing minute. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew that whatever Beatrice had to say could potentially change everything she thought she knew about Ethan. When Beatrice walked in, Clarissa was struck by how young she appeared. At just 28, there was an air of both strength and vulnerability about her. Her pregnancy was evident, a small but noticeable bump under her loose-fitting dress, As Beatrice approached the table, there was a moment of hesitation in her step, as though she were considering turning back. But then she took a deep breath and sat down opposite Clarissa. The initial exchange of pleasantries was brief and somewhat awkward. Neither woman seemed to know how to begin, but it was Beatrice who finally broke the silence. "I'm not sure how much you know," she said quietly, her gaze focused on the steaming cup of tea in front of her. "But I think it's important for you to understand that Ethan was a friend. He was there for me during a time when I had no one else to turn to." Clarissa listened intently, the words stirring a mixture of relief and apprehension. "How did you meet?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. She needed to hear every detail, to understand why her husband had kept this part of his life a secret from her. Beatrice looked up, meeting Clarissa's gaze for the first time since she had sat down. "It was about a year ago," she began. "My husband, Lucas, was wrongfully imprisoned. He was accused of a crime he didn't commit, assault, during a heated altercation where he was actually trying to defend a teenage girl from being harassed." Her voice wavered slightly as she recounted the events. "He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it didn't take much for the authorities to pin the blame on him. It took months of appeals and legal battles to prove his innocence." Clarissa absorbed this information with a sense of growing sympathy. She hadn't expected Ethan to be involved in something so complex, but it made sense. Ethan had always been compassionate, always ready to help those in need. Still, she couldn't help but wonder how this connected to Beatrice's situation, and what it had to do with the phone number she had found. "Ethan was helping you during this time?" Clarissa asked, trying to piece the story together. Beatrice nodded. "Yes, I was desperate and didn't know where to turn. The legal fees were piling up, and I had just found out that I was pregnant. It felt like everything was falling apart at once." She paused, taking a deep breath as though steeling herself to continue. "Ethan came into my life by chance. We met at a support group for families dealing with legal troubles. He was there to give a talk about resources available to people in my situation, and afterward, he approached me. I think he could see how overwhelmed I was." Clarissa's mind flashed back to the many times Ethan had spoken about wanting to do more for the community, particularly for those who had been unjustly treated. He had always believed in standing up for the underdog, in using his skills and resources to make a real difference. The revelation that he had indeed been living out these principles was not entirely surprising, but it did raise the question of why he had kept this part of his life hidden from her. "Did you see him often?" Clarissa asked, struggling to keep the emotion out of her voice. "Not as often as you might think," Beatrice replied, shaking her head. "He helped me connect with a good lawyer, and he made sure I had the support I needed while Lucas was incarcerated. But it wasn't like we were meeting regularly. He was more like a guiding hand in the background, someone who made sure I didn't feel completely alone." Her gaze softened as she continued. "He talked about you, Clarissa. He always spoke with such love and respect for you. It was clear that you were the center of his world." Hearing this brought a sense of relief, but also deepened the sorrow in Clarissa's heart. It was comforting to know that Ethan's love for her had never wavered, but it was painful to realize that he had carried this burden without sharing it with her. The kind of person who reached out to help someone in need was exactly the man she had known and loved. But why had he kept Beatrice a secret? Why hadn't he mentioned this to her, even in passing? As if reading Clarissa's thoughts, Beatrice added, "I think he didn't want to worry you. He knew that you were both dealing with so much at the time. The adoption process, the struggles with infertility. I think he just wanted to handle this on his own, so it wouldn't add to your stress." It was a plausible explanation, but it did little to quell the unease that had settled in Clarissa's chest. She was glad to know that Ethan had been doing something good, something noble, but there was still a lingering sense of loss, not just for Ethan, but for the part of his life that she would never fully know. "Why did you answer the call?" Clarissa asked, her voice softer now. "When I called the number, why did you pick up?" Beatrice's expression changed, a hint of sorrow mixed with a resolve that suggested there was more she needed to share. "I thought you should know," she said simply. "After everything Ethan did for me, I felt I owed it to him and to you to be honest." But there's something else you should be aware of. I didn't want to mention it over the phone. Clarissa's pulse quickened as she listened intently, unsure of what to expect. What is it? She asked, feeling a knot form in her stomach. Beatrice hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. Lucas had an accident shortly after being released from prison. He was trying to come back home to me after finding out I had lost a pregnancy before this one. She placed a hand over her belly. He was desperate to see me, to start over, but he had a terrible fall, and she trailed off, struggling to find the right words. He was paralyzed from the waist down. The weight of this revelation hung heavily in the air. Clarissa could see the pain in Beatrice's eyes as she spoke, and she felt a surge of compassion for the young woman sitting across from her. It was clear that Beatrice had faced more than her share of hardships, and through it all, Ethan had been a source of support, though not in the way Clarissa had initially feared. Beatrice continued. Ethan had reached out to Lucas as well, offering to help with his rehabilitation costs. He believed that everyone deserved a second chance, especially after everything Lucas had been through. The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fall into place. Clarissa could see now that Ethan's involvement with Beatrice wasn't some hidden betrayal, but rather an extension of the values he had always held dear, values that had drawn her to him in the first place. It was a bittersweet realization, knowing that her husband had continued to do good, even in the midst of their own struggles. As Clarissa listened to Beatrice's story, a quiet resolve began to form within her. She realized that perhaps there was a way to honor Ethan's memory, not just by uncovering the truth, but by continuing the work he had started. The question now was how far she was willing to go to make a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. Just as Ethan would have done, Clarissa had come to the cafe seeking answers, but what she found was something much more profound, a connection with Beatrice that she hadn't anticipated. As they spoke, it became evident that their lives had intersected in ways neither of them could have predicted. The revelation of Ethan's role in Beatrice's life, and his attempts to support both her and Lucas during their time of crisis, transformed Clarissa's initial suspicion into a deep sense of empathy. What had started as a pursuit for answers was gradually evolving into the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Their first meeting extended far beyond the simple exchange of information. It turned into a conversation about life, loss, and resilience. Beatrice shared more about Lucas and the challenges they faced after his accident. She spoke of the struggles to adjust to his paralysis, the daunting prospect of raising a child while navigating the complex dynamics of their new reality, and the emotional turmoil they both endured as they tried to rebuild their lives. Her honesty was raw and unfiltered, and it resonated with Clarissa in a way that was both painful and healing. For Clarissa, listening to Beatrice's story stirred memories of her own loss. It was as if each word spoken revived a different part of the grief she had thought was buried. Yet, at the same time, hearing Beatrice's experiences gave her a different perspective on pain and suffering. She wasn't alone in her struggle. There were others who had faced adversity with grace, who had endured despite the odds. It reminded her that while grief is a deeply personal journey, it is also a shared human experience. There was a certain comfort in knowing that the scars they bore were not solely theirs, but were part of a broader story of survival and strength. In the weeks that followed, Clarissa and Beatrice's relationship began to grow. What had started as a single meeting turned into regular conversations, first over the phone and then in person. There was something about the way they understood each other's struggles without needing to explain every detail that made their bond different from other friendships. There was no need for pretense or for avoiding difficult subjects. They spoke openly about their fears, their hopes, and the moments that had broken their hearts. It was a friendship forged in the fires of shared hardship, and it brought with it a sense of healing that neither of them had expected. One afternoon, as they walked together along the New Charleston coastline, Beatrice turned to Clarissa with a hesitant expression. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft but steady, "about what you said, about wanting to find a way to keep Ethan's memory alive. I know it's a lot to ask, but I could use some help with Lucas. The baby is due in a couple of months, and as much as I'd like to think I can handle everything on my own, I'm not sure I can." Clarissa wasn't sure how to respond at first. She had already felt a pull to do something meaningful in the wake of Ethan's passing, but taking on such a role in Beatrice's life seemed like a significant step. Yet, as she looked into Beatrice's eyes, she saw the same quiet determination that had driven her to keep moving forward after Ethan's death. It was the same resolve that had carried her through the darkest moments, and she couldn't help but feel that perhaps this was her chance to find purpose again. "Of course," Clarissa replied, her voice filled with quiet assurance. "I'd be honored to help. I don't know exactly what I can do, but whatever it is, I'm here." Beatrice's relief was palpable. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking slightly as she spoke. "I didn't know who else to turn to, and I think Ethan would have wanted us to support each other. He was always trying to bring people together, to make things better for everyone." The days that followed saw Clarissa taking on a more active role in Beatrice's life. She began helping with practical tasks, such as driving Beatrice to medical appointments and assisting with the preparations for the baby's arrival. But beyond the physical assistance, Clarissa found herself becoming emotionally invested in the well-being of both Beatrice and Lucas. She visited Lucas at the rehabilitation center, where he was undergoing physical therapy. At first, Lucas was reserved, understandably wary of this new person who had suddenly become a part of his and Beatrice's life. But over time, Clarissa's genuine kindness and willingness to listen broke through his defenses. Clarissa soon realized that Lucas was a man of quiet strength. Despite the setbacks, he was determined to regain as much independence as he could. Watching him work through his therapy sessions was inspiring, but it also underscored the immense challenges that lay ahead for the young family. His accident had not only affected his physical capabilities, but had also reshaped his sense of identity and purpose. There were days when his frustration was evident, when the weight of his circumstances seemed too much to bear. In those moments, Clarissa offered words of encouragement and, more importantly, her presence. Sometimes it was enough just to sit with him, to show that he wasn't alone in this fight. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas grew stronger. It wasn't the family Clarissa had once imagined for herself, but it was something equally meaningful. They became each other's support system, navigating the daily trials with a shared resolve. The impending arrival of the baby added a layer of hope to their interactions, a reminder that even in the midst of hardship, new beginnings were possible. One evening, as they gathered at Beatrice and Lucas's modest apartment, Clarissa brought up an idea that had been forming in her mind for some time. "What if we did something to honor Ethan?" she suggested. "Something that continues the work he started, helping people who are facing difficult times. Just like you two were when he met you. We could establish a small fund, or even volunteer together to help other families in need." Beatrice's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "That's a wonderful idea," she said, her enthusiasm evident. "Ethan helped us when we needed it the most. If we could do that for someone else, it would be the best way to keep his legacy alive." Lucas nodded in agreement. "It's a way to give meaning to everything we've been through," he added. "If we can help even one person, it'll make all the difference." With that, a new chapter began for the unlikely trio. They started small, organizing local fundraisers and volunteering at community centers. Clarissa found that the more she invested herself in these efforts, the more her grief began to transform into something constructive. It wasn't that the pain of losing Ethan had vanished. It was still there, quietly lingering, but it no longer consumed her. By channeling her love for Ethan into acts of compassion, she found a way to heal, one step at a time. Their friendship deepened through these shared endeavors, and Clarissa came to see Beatrice and Lucas as an extension of the family she had longed for. It wasn't the traditional family structure she had once envisioned, but it was a family nonetheless formed, not by blood, but by the bonds of shared experience and mutual support. When Beatrice eventually gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom they named Matthew, Clarissa felt an overwhelming sense of joy and gratitude. The arrival of the child symbolized hope and renewal, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For Clarissa, helping Beatrice and Lucas navigate the early days of parenthood was a profound and healing experience. The time spent with Matthew filled the emptiness that had lingered in her heart since Ethan's death, and she found herself embracing this new role in their lives with open arms. In many ways, it felt like she was honoring the life she and Ethan had planned, but in a way that was unique and unanticipated. The bond they shared proved that sometimes family is found in the most unexpected places. Together, Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas were building a new life, one filled with purpose, love, and a commitment to carrying on Ethan's legacy. As they faced the challenges that lay ahead, they did so knowing they were stronger together, united by a love that extended beyond loss and was strengthened by the journey they had shared. As Clarissa continued to spend more time with Beatrice and Lucas, the details of Lucas's past gradually emerged, revealing a complex story of resilience, sacrifice, and unexpected tragedy. Learning more about Lucas's life helped Clarissa understand the depth of the struggles he and Beatrice had endured, and it provided insights into the strength of their bond. It was clear that they had faced numerous challenges even before his wrongful imprisonment and subsequent accident. But as Lucas shared his story, Clarissa would come to realize that there were even more twists to their journey than she had initially imagined. Lucas, now 33, was a man whose life had been shaped by a series of difficult decisions and circumstances beyond his control. He had always been known for his kind and generous nature, a trait that often led him to help others, sometimes to his own detriment. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Lucas had developed a strong sense of justice from an early age. He had always been the type to stand up for the underdog, even when it put him at odds with people who wielded power or influence. Before his accident, Lucas had worked as a youth counselor, helping at-risk teenagers navigate the challenges of growing up in difficult environments. He was passionate about his job, often going beyond his official duties to ensure that the kids in his care felt supported and seen. For many of these teenagers, Lucas was more than just a counselor. He was a mentor and a role model, someone who understood the struggles they faced and who could offer guidance without judgment. It was a role that gave him a sense of purpose, and he found fulfillment in knowing he was making a difference in the lives of young people who needed it the most. However, his dedication to helping others also placed him in difficult situations, including the one that eventually led to his imprisonment. The incident that landed him in jail had occurred on a night when he was walking home from work. Lucas noticed a commotion outside a convenience store. A young girl, no more than 15 years old, was being harassed by a group of men. Without hesitation, Lucas intervened, his protective instincts kicking in. He managed to get the girl away from the situation, but not before a physical altercation broke out between him and one of the aggressors. The police arrived shortly thereafter, and in the chaos that ensued, Lucas was mistaken for the instigator. The men involved had claimed that Lucas had attacked them without provocation, and with the teenage girl too frightened to speak up, Lucas was charged with assault. It was an unjust accusation, and although Lucas maintained his innocence, the legal system didn't work in his favor. He was sentenced to serve time in prison, despite the lack of substantial evidence against him. For Beatrice, Lucas's imprisonment was a devastating blow. She was pregnant at the time and found herself navigating a world that suddenly felt much colder and harsher. The financial burden of Lucas's legal fees and the stress of his wrongful conviction weighed heavily on her. The emotional toll was even greater, as she struggled with feelings of isolation and fear for the future. Yet, it was during this dark period that Ethan entered their lives, offering support when they needed it the most. Ethan's involvement had been a lifeline for Beatrice. He had helped her secure a lawyer who eventually managed to overturn Lucas's conviction. The process was long and arduous, requiring months of appeals and legal battles, but in the end, the truth prevailed. When Lucas was finally released from prison, it seemed like a new chapter was about to begin for him and Beatrice. However, their joy was short-lived. Soon after his release, Lucas learned that Beatrice had suffered a miscarriage while he was incarcerated. The loss was a profound and heartbreaking experience for both of them. But for Lucas, it was coupled with a sense of guilt and helplessness. He felt as though his time in prison had not only stolen away precious moments he could never get back, but had also contributed to the loss of their child. Determined to be there for Beatrice, he threw himself into rebuilding their lives, promising to be the husband and soon-to-be father she deserved. Tragically, just when it seemed they were finding a semblance of normalcy, fate intervened once again. One evening, Lucas received word that Beatrice had gone into premature labor with their second pregnancy, a critical situation that required immediate medical attention. In a desperate rush to be by her side, he had a terrible accident while traveling to the hospital. He fell down a flight of stairs, resulting in a spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the waist down. The aftermath of the accident brought a new set of challenges. Lucas faced months of rehabilitation, coming to terms with his new reality as a paraplegic. It was a devastating blow, not only to his physical abilities, but to his sense of identity. The active lifestyle he had once enjoyed, the freedom to move and work as he pleased, had been taken from him in an instant. He struggled with feelings of frustration and despair, often questioning what kind of father he could be in his condition. Yet, despite these doubts, he refused to let his circumstances defeat him. With Beatrice's unwavering support, he committed himself to physical therapy, determined to regain as much independence as possible. As Lucas shared these details with Clarissa, she could see the resilience in his eyes. He was not the kind of man who gave up easily, even when the odds were stacked against him. It was clear that his love for Beatrice and his unborn child were the driving forces behind his perseverance. Clarissa found herself deeply moved by their story, which mirrored in many ways her own journey of loss and healing. The twists and turns that had shaped their lives had also brought them closer together, binding them through shared struggles and mutual support. What struck Clarissa most was the strength of the bond between Lucas and Beatrice. They had faced incredible adversity, yet their love had not only survived, but had been strengthened by the trials they endured. Their commitment to each other in the face of so many challenges was a powerful reminder of what it meant to love unconditionally, to stand by one another even when the future seemed uncertain. It was the kind of love that reminded her of her own marriage to Ethan, and she found solace in knowing that such resilience was still possible, even after loss. Over time, Lucas began to see Clarissa as more than just Beatrice's friend. She became a part of the support system that had formed around him. Her willingness to listen, to help, and to simply be present made a significant difference in his life. Clarissa, for her part, felt a sense of purpose return to her, a feeling she hadn't experienced since Ethan's death. It was as though by helping Lucas and Beatrice, she was able to honor Ethan's legacy, to continue the work he had started by reaching out to those in need. The closer they became, the more Clarissa understood that Ethan's kindness toward Beatrice and Lucas had not been a random act, but a reflection of who he was at his core. Ethan had always believed in second chances, in supporting others, even when it seemed like there was nothing to gain from it. Clarissa realized that through this newfound friendship, she could continue Ethan's mission of helping others find hope and healing, even in the darkest of times. But as Clarissa became more integrated into their lives, another revelation came to light, one that would connect the past in a way none of them could have anticipated. While reviewing some documents related to Lucas's ongoing legal issues and rehabilitation, Clarissa stumbled upon a name she hadn't seen in years: Henry Whitmore. It was a name that appeared in the records as someone who had briefly offered financial support during Lucas's legal battle. What made this discovery startling was that Henry Whitmore was not a stranger. He was Ethan's estranged father, a man who had been absent from Ethan's life for decades. The connection seemed too coincidental to ignore, and it raised new questions about the intertwining of their lives. Why had Henry intervened in Lucas's legal matters, and had Ethan known about it? As Clarissa pondered these questions, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to the story, hidden layers that linked not just Ethan, Beatrice, and Lucas, but possibly their entire family history. The discovery of Henry's involvement brought a twist that none of them had seen coming. It would open a door to the past, revealing secrets long buried and connections long forgotten, forcing Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas to confront truths that could change their lives forever. The revelation of Henry Whitmore's connection to Lucas's past set in motion a series of events that would profoundly shape the lives of Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas. It was a discovery that brought with it as many questions as it did answers, challenging them to rethink everything they thought they knew about their intertwined histories. As Clarissa delved deeper into Henry's background and his estrangement from Ethan, she found herself unearthing a complex story of unresolved family conflict, secrets, and the possibility of redemption. Clarissa learned that Henry had left Ethan and his mother when Ethan was a young boy. The separation had been contentious, leaving Ethan with feelings of abandonment that he rarely spoke about, even to Clarissa. Henry had disappeared from their lives, moving to another state and severing all contact. Although there had been occasional attempts to reconnect, they were met with silence, and Ethan eventually accepted that his father had chosen a different path. Clarissa had known about Ethan's estranged father, but she had never expected to see his name reappear in such an unexpected context, especially linked to Lucas's life. Determined to uncover the truth behind Henry's involvement in Lucas's legal battle, Clarissa reached out to him. It wasn't an easy decision, but she knew that if she was going to understand the full picture, she needed to confront the man who had, in a strange twist of fate, become connected to her and her friends' lives. When Henry agreed to meet her, she was both relieved and anxious. She had no idea what to expect from this man who had once been a significant figure in Ethan's life but had become nothing more than a distant memory. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe, the same one where Clarissa had first met Beatrice. As she waited, Clarissa's mind raced with thoughts about Ethan, about the life he had lived and the questions he had left unanswered. When Henry finally arrived, she was struck by the resemblance to Ethan, the same determined jawline, the same thoughtful eyes, though time had added lines of regret and weariness to his face. There was a moment of silence as they regarded each other, both trying to read the other's intentions. Henry spoke first, his voice heavy with emotion. "I suppose you're here because of Ethan," he began, his gaze steady but softened by a touch of remorse. "I've made mistakes that kept me away from him and from the life I should have been a part of." Clarissa nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I found your name connected to Lucas's legal records," she said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Why did you get involved?" Henry sighed and leaned back in his chair, as though the weight of the years was pressing down on him all at once. "It was guilt, in part," he admitted. "When I learned about Lucas's situation, I saw an opportunity to help someone in a way that I never could with Ethan. I didn't know who Lucas was to Ethan, but when I heard his story, what he had gone through, the injustice he had faced, I saw a chance to do something good, to be the person I had failed to be in my own son's life." As Henry spoke, Clarissa began to see that his actions had been motivated by more than just a sense of duty or guilt. There was a genuine desire for redemption, a need to make amends, even if only indirectly. It became clear that helping Lucas had been Henry's way of trying to reconcile with a past he couldn't change. The knowledge that Ethan had, in some way, been connected to Lucas was an unintended consequence that now linked all of them in ways none of them had foreseen. With Henry's reluctant admission came another revelation. He hadn't known about Ethan's death until Clarissa had contacted him. The news hit him hard, and for a moment, he seemed unable to speak, his eyes filling with tears. The loss of his son, even from a distance, was a grief he hadn't anticipated, and it was compounded by the knowledge that he would never get the chance to make things right. As the conversation continued, Henry expressed a desire to help Lucas more directly, offering to support his ongoing rehabilitation efforts and to be there for him in ways that extended beyond financial aid. It was an offer that surprised Clarissa, but also one that resonated with the spirit of what Ethan had stood for, helping others without expecting anything in return. She realized that while it would not undo the past, it could create a path forward for Henry to be part of a new family dynamic that was taking shape. When Clarissa shared Henry's intentions with Beatrice and Lucas, their reactions were mixed. Beatrice, always the optimist, saw it as a potential blessing, an opportunity for Lucas to receive the support he needed. Lucas, on the other hand, was more skeptical. The idea of accepting help from a man he didn't know, who had been estranged from Ethan for so long, was difficult to come to terms with. He questioned whether Henry's motives were genuine, or if he was simply looking for a way to assuage his own guilt. Despite his reservations, Lucas eventually agreed to meet Henry. It was a cautious beginning, marked by uncertainty and hesitation. Yet, as they spoke, Lucas saw in Henry a sincerity that was hard to dismiss. Henry was forthcoming about his failings as a father, admitting the mistakes that had kept him away and the regrets that had haunted him for years. There was no attempt to excuse his actions, only a quiet acknowledgement of the damage they had caused. Over time, Lucas began to let down his guard, allowing himself to consider that perhaps Henry truly was trying to make amends, not just for Ethan, but for himself. As Henry became more involved in their lives, a new kind of family began to emerge, one that was unconventional, but no less genuine. It wasn't just about Lucas accepting Henry's help. It was about all of them finding ways to support each other through their respective struggles. Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas had already formed a close-knit bond, but Henry's presence added another layer to their dynamic. It wasn't about replacing anyone or filling a void left by Ethan's absence. It was about building something new from the pieces that life had given them. Matthew's birth marked a significant turning point for them all. When Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy, it brought joy and hope into their lives in a way that seemed almost miraculous after everything they had endured. Henry was there, not just as an observer, but as an active participant in their celebration. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something real, something that transcended the mistakes of the past. Holding his grandson in his arms, Henry couldn't help but feel that this new life symbolized a second chance, not just for him, but for all of them. The early days of Matthew's life were filled with moments of shared joy and quiet challenges. Clarissa took on the role of a supportive aunt, always ready to lend a hand or offer advice. She found herself becoming more and more attached to the little boy, whose innocent smile seemed to light up the room. For Beatrice, having Clarissa and Henry's help was invaluable, providing her with the strength and reassurance she needed as a new mother. Lucas, despite the limitations imposed by his injury, embraced fatherhood with a determination that was inspiring to everyone around him. He may not have been able to do everything he once could, but his love for Matthew was boundless, and he was determined to be the best father he could be. As the months passed, the group grew closer, weathering the ups and downs of life together. They faced the daily challenges of Lucas's rehabilitation, the adjustments of caring for a newborn, and the emotional complexities of healing old wounds. Henry played an active role, not just in supporting Lucas's physical recovery, but in offering the wisdom that came from his own hard-learned lessons. He and Lucas slowly built a relationship based on mutual respect, and though it was still fragile, it was a start, one that spoke to the possibility of forgiveness and growth. For Clarissa, the experience of forming this new family had brought her a sense of peace that she hadn't thought possible after Ethan's death. Helping Beatrice and Lucas raise Matthew, reconnecting Henry with a part of his lost family, and finding new ways to honor Ethan's memory had all contributed to her own healing. The grief was still there, a quiet reminder of the love she had lost, but it no longer felt like an anchor pulling her down. Instead, it had become a foundation upon which a new kind of love could grow, a love built on empathy, resilience, and the shared commitment to carry forward the best parts of Ethan's legacy. In the midst of their journey, Clarissa, Beatrice, Lucas, and Henry had come to understand that family isn't just defined by blood or traditional roles. It's about the connections they choose to nurture, the people they decide to stand by, and the love they share in spite of life's many uncertainties. Together, they were creating a new story, one that celebrated the beauty of second chances, the strength found in overcoming adversity, and the profound impact of compassion and forgiveness. As the new family settled into their lives together, an unexpected addition arrived to further bind them. It happened on a chilly afternoon as Clarissa took a walk along the New Charleston coastline, a routine she had maintained ever since Ethan's death. The fresh sea air and rhythmic sound of the waves always seemed to calm her, offering a moment of peace amidst the ongoing challenges of life. On this particular day, however, she noticed something unusual: a scruffy dog sitting alone on the beach, shivering in the cold. The dog was medium-sized with a rough coat that suggested a mix of breeds. Its eyes, a warm brown, were filled with a mix of curiosity and wariness as it watched Clarissa approach. She could see that it was thin and looked as though it hadn't had a proper meal in days. There was no collar or tag, no sign that it belonged to anyone. Clarissa felt an instant pang of compassion for the poor creature, recognizing in its lonely state a reflection of the loss and isolation she herself had once felt. Cautiously, she crouched down a few feet away from the dog and spoke softly. "Hey there, buddy. You look like you could use a friend." The dog's ears perked up, but it didn't move from its spot, still hesitant to trust a stranger. Clarissa extended her hand slowly, allowing the dog to sniff her fingers. After a few moments of tense silence, the dog took a tentative step forward, its gaze meeting hers with a mixture of hope and fear. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar, her emergency snack for long walks, and unwrapped it, offering a piece to the dog. The dog's initial hesitation melted away at the sight of food. It devoured the small offering quickly, its hunger apparent. As Clarissa watched it eat, she couldn't help but feel a surge of protectiveness for this stray, who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. It was clear the dog had been abandoned or lost, and it didn't seem right to leave it there on the beach to fend for itself. She gently patted the dog's head and noticed the slight wag of its tail, a signal of tentative trust. In that moment, she decided to take the dog home, at least temporarily, until she could find out if it belonged to someone or if there was a local shelter that could take it in. When Clarissa brought the dog to Beatrice and Lucas's apartment, she was greeted with a mixture of surprise and amusement. Beatrice, who had always had a soft spot for animals, immediately took to the dog, fussing over its matted fur and offering it a bowl of water. Lucas, from his spot in the living room, chuckled as the dog eagerly lapped up the water. "Looks like we've got ourselves a new roommate," he joked, though his tone suggested he wouldn't mind if the dog stayed permanently. Matthew, only a few months old, watched the scene with wide eyes from his playpen, fascinated by the new creature in the house. The dog approached the baby cautiously, sniffing the air around him, and Matthew responded with a delighted gurgle, reaching out toward his new furry friend. The sight of Matthew's tiny hand patting the dog's head was enough to melt everyone's heart, sealing the dog's place in their little family. It didn't take long for them to give the dog a name, Thor, after the mythical Norse god of thunder, in a playful nod to the dog's scrappy appearance and resilient nature. In the days that followed, Thor settled in with remarkable ease, as if he had always been part of their lives. His playful energy brought a new kind of joy to the household, one that was both healing and invigorating. For Lucas, having Thor around during his rehabilitation sessions was particularly uplifting. The dog would lie next to him as he worked through his exercises, his presence a quiet reminder of loyalty and companionship. Thor seemed to sense when Lucas was struggling or frustrated, nuzzling his hand as if to encourage him to keep going. The bond that formed between them was special, an unspoken understanding between two beings who had both faced adversity and were determined to persevere. For Clarissa, having Thor around helped fill the quiet moments in her day. The dog quickly became her walking companion, joining her on the familiar coastal paths where she had first found him. His enthusiasm for their daily outings added a sense of purpose to her routine, and the way he trotted ahead and then looked back at her as if urging her to keep up made her smile. It was as though Thor had come into her life at just the right time, a symbol of resilience and new beginnings that resonated deeply with her own journey. As winter turned to spring, the family's bond with Thor only grew stronger. The dog had become an integral part of their lives, his antics bringing laughter and lightness even on the more challenging days. It was as if he had been sent to remind them all that even in the wake of loss and hardship, there was still room for joy and growth. Thor's transformation from a stray to a beloved family member mirrored the transformation that was taking place in each of their lives as they learned to navigate their new roles and relationships. Then, one night, Thor's presence in their lives would prove to be even more significant than they had ever imagined. It happened during a quiet evening when Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas were gathered in the living room, relaxing after a long day. Matthew was already asleep in his crib, and Thor lay curled up on the rug near the front door. Suddenly, the dog sprang to his feet, his ears perked up and a low growl rumbling in his throat. His sudden change in demeanor immediately alerted the others that something wasn't right. Thor darted toward the door, barking loudly, a sound that was both protective and alarming. Clarissa quickly moved to calm him, but before she could reach the door, there was a loud crash from outside. Someone was trying to break in. The sound of shattering glass filled the room as a shadowy figure attempted to force entry through the front window. Thor's barking grew more intense, and without hesitation, the dog lunged at the intruder, forcing them to retreat. It all happened so quickly that it was over before any of them had time to fully process what was going on. The police arrived shortly afterward, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the commotion. The would-be burglar had fled the scene, but thanks to Thor's quick response, no one had been harmed and nothing had been stolen. The officers commended Thor for his bravery, jokingly referring to him as the hero dog. For Clarissa, Beatrice, and Lucas, however, the incident was a sobering reminder of how fragile safety could be and how quickly life could change. It also solidified their gratitude for the unexpected protector who had come into their lives. In the days following the attempted break-in, the family's appreciation for Thor deepened. He was more than just a pet. He was a guardian, a reminder that even a stray dog could make a profound impact on the lives of those who welcomed him. Thor's bravery had not only protected them physically, but had also strengthened the emotional bonds they shared. The gratitude and love they felt for him were reciprocated in his unwavering loyalty, his bright eyes always watching over them with a silent promise to protect. For Lucas, the incident brought a renewed determination to his rehabilitation. Seeing Thor's courage reminded him that even the smallest acts of bravery could have a significant impact. It inspired him to push himself further in his therapy, to fight for the ability to stand, even if just for a moment. With Clarissa, Beatrice, and now Thor by his side, he knew he wasn't facing these challenges alone. There was a family supporting him, one that had formed in the most unexpected of ways, yet felt as real and as meaningful as any traditional family could. Thor's arrival and heroic act became a symbol of the resilience and love that defined their new family. It was a reminder that family could be found in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the smallest of beings could make the biggest difference. Together, they continued to navigate life's challenges with courage, finding strength in one another and embracing the beauty of second chances. As life settled into a steady rhythm, the unexpected trials that had brought Clarissa, Beatrice, Lucas, Henry, and Thor together seemed to give way to a sense of normalcy. Matthew was growing quickly, filling their days with the joy and wonder of his early milestones. And Lucas was making significant progress in his rehabilitation, his perseverance becoming a source of inspiration for everyone. However, just as it seemed that life had finally granted them a reprieve, an unforeseen situation emerged that would test their integrity and values. Lucas, having regained some mobility and independence, had recently started working as a rideshare driver to contribute to the family's finances. He viewed the job as more than just a source of income. It was a way to reclaim a sense of normalcy and purpose. While he still relied on adaptive equipment to drive, the work gave him the opportunity to interact with different people every day, reminding him that despite his limitations, he could still make a meaningful contribution. One evening, after completing a series of trips, Lucas noticed an old suitcase left in the backseat of his car. It was plain and unassuming, something that could easily be overlooked, but as he reached over to retrieve it, he felt an unexpected weight. The suitcase was heavy, much heavier than he had anticipated. Curious and concerned that one of his passengers had forgotten something important, Lucas took the suitcase inside and placed it on the dining table. As Clarissa and Beatrice gathered around, Lucas carefully unzipped the suitcase. What they saw next took their breath away. The suitcase was filled with stacks of cash, neatly organized bundles that looked as though they had just come from a bank. The sight of the money was almost surreal, an improbable twist that seemed more fitting for a movie than for their own lives. For a moment, none of them spoke, each one grappling with the magnitude of what they were seeing. "This can't be real," Beatrice murmured, her voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. "Who just leaves this much money behind?" Clarissa's mind was already racing, not just with questions about who had left the money, but also with thoughts about what it could mean for them. The financial strain of Lucas's medical expenses had been a constant challenge, and despite Henry's generous contributions, there were still bills piling up. The money in that suitcase could cover Lucas's long-awaited surgery to regain more mobility. It could secure Matthew's future and even ease the financial burdens that had loomed over them for so long. For a brief moment, it was tempting to see the money as a kind of gift, a stroke of fortune that had come to them in their time of need. But that fleeting thought quickly gave way to a deeper sense of unease. It wasn't their money, and taking it would mean compromising the values that had brought them together in the first place. Lucas, despite the circumstances, felt a profound sense of responsibility to do what was right, even if the temptation to use the money was overwhelming. "We can't keep this," he said firmly, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "It's not ours, and we have no idea where it came from. For all we know, this money could be tied to something illegal." Clarissa nodded in agreement, relieved to hear Lucas's resolute tone. "We need to report it to the police," she said. "It's the only way to make sure it gets back to its rightful owner. Keeping it, even for a good reason, wouldn't be right." Beatrice, though initially more hesitant, also conceded. She understood that using the money, no matter how noble their intentions, would come at the cost of their integrity. It wasn't just about the potential legal ramifications. It was about the moral example they wanted to set for Matthew and the kind of people they aspired to be. The decision was made, and Lucas contacted the authorities, explaining how he had come across the suitcase. The police arrived shortly thereafter to collect the money and investigate its origin. The officers expressed their appreciation for Lucas's honesty, noting that many people in his situation might have made a different choice. As they took the suitcase away, Lucas felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. There was a sense of having done the right thing, but also the lingering question of whether life would have been easier if they had taken a different path. In the days that followed, the story of Lucas's discovery and his decision to turn the money in began to circulate around the community. Some people praised his honesty, while others questioned whether it had been a missed opportunity to change their circumstances. Even Lucas himself couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if they had kept the money, especially when he saw the bills piling up on the kitchen counter and considered the cost of his ongoing medical care. Then, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A man named Henry Gibson, a retired businessman, reached out to Lucas through the police. He claimed to be the rightful owner of the money and requested to meet with Lucas in person to thank him. The meeting was arranged at a local cafe, and Lucas, accompanied by Clarissa, was curious to learn more about how the money had ended up in his car and why this stranger was so eager to meet him. When they arrived, Henry was already seated, his demeanor one of calm composure. He greeted Lucas and Clarissa with a warm handshake, expressing his gratitude for their honesty. "It's not every day that you come across someone who would turn in that much money," he remarked. "You did the right thing, even when it wasn't easy." Henry explained that the money was part of a cash inheritance he had recently withdrawn from the bank for a private matter. During his rideshare trip, he had been preoccupied with personal issues and had accidentally left the suitcase behind. He had already come to terms with the possibility that he might never see the money again. So learning that Lucas had turned it in was a pleasant surprise. As they continued talking, Henry noticed the way Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the signs of a man who had been through more than his fair share of hardship. When the conversation turned to Lucas's life, his injury, and the struggles he had faced since the accident, Henry listened intently. It was clear that Lucas was not sharing his story for sympathy, but rather as an explanation of why doing the right thing had come at such a significant personal cost. Moved by Lucas's story and inspired by his integrity, Henry made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "I'd like to help you," he said, his voice sincere. "I can cover the cost of your surgery and rehabilitation. It's the least I can do after you return that money to me." Lucas was taken aback by the offer. It was an extraordinary gesture from a man who owed him nothing. For a moment, he struggled to find the words to express his gratitude. "You don't have to do that," he began. But Henry waved the comment away with a kind smile. "Consider it a reward for your honesty," Henry replied. "And maybe a little bit of fate. Sometimes life brings people together in unexpected ways for a reason." With Henry's support, Lucas was finally able to schedule the surgery that could improve his mobility and give him a chance at a more independent life. The procedure was successful, and Lucas's recovery, while challenging, showed steady progress. The family's decision to do the right thing had not only brought about a positive outcome, but had also reaffirmed their belief that acts of integrity, even when difficult, often lead to unforeseen blessings. As Lucas regained his strength, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The moral dilemma with the found money had been a test of character, one that he, Clarissa, and Beatrice had faced together. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the choices they made and the values they held dear. Their experience reminded them that doing what is right is often the harder path, but it is also the one that brings true peace of mind. The family had once again demonstrated resilience and integrity in the face of life's challenges, emerging stronger and more united. Their journey showed that when faced with moral dilemmas, the choices made with honesty and compassion often pave the way for unexpected opportunities and connections, reinforcing the belief that goodness has a way of coming back around. With Lucas's surgery and rehabilitation well underway, life began to stabilize once more for the newly formed family. The surgery had been a success, allowing Lucas to regain significant mobility and pursue a life that felt more like his own again. The recovery was not without its difficulties, but he faced each day with a sense of gratitude and determination. Bolstered by the support of Clarissa, Beatrice, and even Henry Whitmore, who had increasingly become part of their lives. As Lucas's condition improved, the family couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together and the role that Henry Gibson, the retired businessman, had played in changing their circumstances. Lucas's decision to return the money had led to a remarkable outcome, one that seemed to affirm their belief in doing the right thing. Yet, there was still one more revelation to come, one that would connect their lives in a way that none of them could have anticipated. Henry Gibson had continued to stay in touch with Lucas following the surgery. What had started as a gesture of gratitude for Lucas's honesty grew into a genuine friendship. Henry admired Lucas's resilience and appreciated the kindness he saw in Clarissa and Beatrice. As they spent more time together, Henry began to share more about his own life, including stories about his past, his career, and the regrets he carried. One evening, over dinner at Lucas and Beatrice's home, Henry opened up about a part of his life that had long remained in the shadows. "There's something I haven't told you," he began, his tone indicating that the words weighed heavily on him. "The money you found, it wasn't just cash I had withdrawn for a random reason. It was part of an inheritance I had set aside for family matters, family I hadn't seen in decades." Lucas and Clarissa exchanged a glance, sensing that Henry's story was about to take a significant turn. "What do you mean, Henry?" Clarissa asked gently. Henry took a deep breath before continuing. "My name is not just Henry Gibson, it's Henry Whitmore. The same name that appeared on those old legal documents you found when you were looking into Lucas's case." The room fell silent as the implication of Henry's words settled in. The connection between Henry and Ethan was now unmistakable. Henry saw the recognition in their eyes and went on, his voice laced with regret. "Yes, Ethan was my son," he confirmed. "And Lucas, it turns out, is also my son, though I didn't know about him until recently." The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. Lucas's eyes widened in disbelief as he struggled to comprehend the meaning of what Henry was saying. "You're my father?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Henry nodded, his expression a mix of sorrow and longing. "I didn't know about you, Lucas, not until after I learned of Ethan's passing. I had been out of his life for so long, and when I finally tried to reconnect, it was too late." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "It was during that time that I found out about you, your mother and I. We had a brief relationship years ago, before I left Ethan and his mother. She never told me she was pregnant." For Lucas, the revelation was overwhelming. In a single moment, the narrative of his life had shifted dramatically, and a man who had been a stranger just months earlier was now revealed to be his biological father. The emotions surged in different directions: anger for the years of absence, confusion over the sudden connection, and a strange sense of relief that he now understood why their paths had crossed in such an unlikely manner. It was a reunion he had never expected, and it carried with it both the potential for healing and the risk of reopening old wounds. Clarissa felt a wave of astonishment as she processed Henry's words. The implications of this revelation reached far beyond mere coincidence. It was as though fate had intertwined their lives for a purpose, bringing them together in the most roundabout of ways. She thought of Ethan and the long-estranged father he had often refused to speak about. What would he have thought of all this? Would he have welcomed the idea of reconciliation? Or would he have kept his distance even now? Henry, seeing the turmoil in Lucas's eyes, spoke again. "I know this is a lot to take in. I don't expect you to accept me as your father just because of biology. I haven't earned that right. But if you're willing, I would like to be part of your life, to be the father I failed to be for Ethan." The emotions in the room were palpable. Beatrice reached out to hold Lucas's hand, offering silent support as he wrestled with his thoughts. After a long moment, Lucas finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I can't say I know how to feel about this right now," he admitted. "It's a lot to process, but I'm willing to try, to figure out what it means to have you in my life." For Henry, those words were more than he had dared to hope for. It was a chance to make amends, to rebuild a family that had been broken for so long. He knew that it would not be easy. Relationships forged from the ashes of the past rarely were, but there was something profoundly healing about the opportunity to try. In the weeks that followed, Henry gradually became a more regular presence in their lives. He helped Lucas through the remainder of his rehabilitation, encouraging him during the toughest moments and celebrating each small victory. He also spent time with Matthew, embracing his role as a grandfather with a sense of joy and responsibility he hadn't known in years. For Beatrice, having Henry around brought stability and reassurance, while for Clarissa, it offered a bittersweet comfort. She saw in Henry a glimpse of what Ethan might have wanted, a chance for his father to do better, to show that people could change and that second chances were real. The bond between Henry and Lucas developed slowly, with moments of awkwardness and uncertainty. There were times when Lucas found it hard to reconcile the absence of his father with the man now standing before him. But with each passing day, the old wounds began to heal. Conversations about the past led to a deeper understanding of the choices and regrets that had shaped their lives. Henry did not try to excuse his mistakes. Instead, he acknowledged them openly, leaving room for Lucas to accept or reject him as he saw fit. For Lucas, the process of getting to know Henry also brought him closer to his memories of Ethan. He felt as though he was learning more about his half-brother through the stories. Henry shared stories that painted a picture of the man Ethan had been and the life he had lived before their paths crossed. It was a connection that deepened Lucas's appreciation for the support Ethan had provided him and Beatrice during their darkest days. The legacy Ethan had left behind was more than just an act of kindness. It was a testament to the kind of person he had always been, even in the face of personal struggles. Clarissa, who had found herself at the center of this unfolding family saga, drew comfort from seeing the healing that was taking place. She had watched as Lucas and Henry, two men who had once been strangers, slowly built a bond based on mutual respect and shared history. It wasn't a perfect process, but it was genuine, and it was proof that even the most fractured relationships could find a way to mend. The connections between them grew stronger as they continued to support one another through life's many challenges. With Lucas's newfound mobility and Henry's presence as a stabilizing force, the family found themselves embracing the future with hope. There were still hurdles to overcome, but they faced them together, knowing that they had already come so far. The journey that began with a mysterious phone number had led them through grief, loss, revelations, and new beginnings. It had shown them that family can be found and formed in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes the road to healing requires taking a chance on forgiveness. As they moved forward, they carried with them the understanding that love, in all its forms, has the power to transform even the most unlikely of circumstances into something beautiful. With Henry now fully integrated into their lives, the family began to navigate the path toward healing and growth, determined to embrace the second chances that fate had offered them. The once fragile relationships between Clarissa, Lucas, Beatrice, Henry, and even little Matthew began to solidify into something deeper and more enduring. As they came together to face life's challenges, they discovered that the bonds they had formed were no longer simply a matter of circumstance. They had become the foundation upon which they were building a new life. Lucas's recovery continued to show progress, and with each day, he felt more confident in his abilities. The surgery and rehabilitation had given him a level of mobility that he had not thought possible when he was first paralyzed. Though there were still some limitations, the improvements made a tremendous difference in his quality of life. He was able to do more with Matthew, from lifting him up and spinning him around, to taking him to the park for short walks. These moments of normalcy felt like small victories, reminding him that despite the setbacks, life could still be full of joy and possibility. Henry played a key role in Lucas's ongoing rehabilitation, often accompanying him to therapy sessions and encouraging him to push a little further each time. His presence as a father figure, though unconventional, provided Lucas with a sense of validation he hadn't realized he needed. It wasn't just about overcoming physical limitations anymore. It was about reclaiming his sense of self and redefining what it meant to be a husband, father, and son. The quiet, unspoken support that Henry offered helped Lucas bridge the gap between the life he had lost and the one he was now creating. For Clarissa, the journey toward healing took on a different shape. In many ways, she had already come to terms with Ethan's death, finding solace in her relationships with Beatrice, Lucas, and now Henry. Yet, there were moments when grief would catch her off guard. A song on the radio, a familiar scent, or an old photograph would bring back memories of the life she had once shared with Ethan. These moments were bittersweet, filled with both love and longing. But Clarissa had come to understand that grief was not something to be conquered or forgotten. It was a part of the love she continued to carry for Ethan, woven into the fabric of her life. She found comfort in channeling her emotions into acts of kindness and compassion, often participating in the family's volunteer work to support others who were going through difficult times. Together, they established a small foundation in Ethan's memory, aimed at helping families affected by sudden loss, wrongful imprisonment, and physical disabilities. It was a way for Clarissa to continue Ethan's legacy of giving, to transform her pain into a force for good that could touch the lives of others. The foundation became a shared mission, one that brought the entire family closer as they worked toward a common goal. Beatrice, who had always been a source of optimism and resilience, found that the strength of their new family dynamic allowed her to confront her own fears and doubts. She had spent years worrying about Lucas, about the future, and about whether they would ever truly find peace after all the heartache they had endured. But now, with Henry's support, Clarissa's friendship, and Lucas's regained strength, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they were rebuilding. Watching Lucas grow into his role as a father, despite the obstacles he faced, filled her with pride and hope. Their love had been tested by adversity, but it had emerged stronger, its roots deepened by the trials they had faced together. As Matthew grew, he became the glue that bound them all together. His laughter, his curiosity, and his innocent view of the world brought a renewed sense of purpose to each of their lives. He was the embodiment of second chances, a symbol of the future they were all working to create. Whether it was watching him take his first steps, hearing him say his first words, or simply seeing him interact with Thor, the loyal dog who had become his constant companion, Matthew reminded them all of the beauty that could be found in starting over. Thor, the ever-faithful dog who had come into their lives so unexpectedly, continued to play a special role in the family's healing. His playful spirit and protective nature made him an essential part of their daily lives, and his presence served as a reminder of the kindness that exists even in the most unexpected places. Thor's loyalty was unwavering, and his bond with each family member was unique, whether it was sitting by Lucas during his therapy exercises, playing with Matthew in the backyard, or curling up next to Clarissa during quiet evenings at home. The once stray dog had found his forever home, and in doing so, had helped the family find theirs as well. Even Henry, who had come into their lives later, found himself growing deeply attached to this new sense of family. The opportunity to be a part of Matthew's upbringing and to mend his relationship with Lucas gave him a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. He also began to share more about his own past, his regrets, and the experiences that had shaped him. By opening up, he showed Lucas and Clarissa that he was not just a man seeking redemption, but a person who had learned from his mistakes and who was genuinely committed to being better. One day, as they gathered to celebrate Matthew's first birthday, the weight of all that had happened seemed to come into focus. It wasn't just a celebration of Matthew's life. It was a testament to the family's resilience and growth. As they sang "Happy Birthday" and helped Matthew blow out his candle, there was a shared understanding among them, a recognition of how far they had come and the strength they had found in each other. The love that filled the room was palpable, and it was clear that this celebration was about more than just one milestone. It was about the journey they had all taken to arrive at that moment. Later that evening, Clarissa stood outside on the porch, looking up at the night sky. She thought of Ethan, wondering if he would have been proud of the choices they had made and the life they were building. She believed in her heart that he would be. She knew that what they had created was not just a continuation of his legacy, but an evolution of it. Ethan had always been about helping others and finding light in the darkness. And now, through the foundation, through their relationships, and through the love they shared, his spirit lived on in all of them. As the weeks turned into months and the seasons changed, the family continued to grow, not just in number, but in depth. They faced life's trials together, always with the knowledge that they were stronger as a unit. There were still challenges: Lucas's ongoing recovery, the demands of raising a young child, and the occasional resurfacing of old wounds. But they faced these with a renewed sense of unity and courage. Clarissa found herself imagining new possibilities for the future, including the idea of one day adopting a child. The thought no longer filled her with the same sorrow it once had. Instead, it felt like an opportunity to extend the love that had flourished in their home. With Matthew already bringing so much joy into their lives, the idea of expanding their family felt like a natural progression. She knew that, just as with everything else, they would approach it as a family, supporting each other and embracing the challenges together. For Lucas, each day brought new victories, both big and small. He was no longer defined by his injury. He was a father, a husband, and a man who had found a sense of purpose again. He continued to work with the foundation, mentoring others who were going through difficult times and sharing his story of resilience. The experience not only helped others, but also allowed him to reflect on his own journey and how far he had come. The connection with his father, Henry, continued to grow. And while there were still moments of awkwardness or unresolved feelings, there was also a deepening bond that felt real and significant. In the end, the story of Clarissa, Lucas, Beatrice, Henry, and Matthew was not just one of healing, but of transformation. It was about finding strength in vulnerability, embracing the unexpected, and creating a family where love was the binding force. Their journey was a testament to the idea that, even in the face of profound loss, there are always new paths to take, new lives to touch, and new ways to rebuild. The family had come together not by blood alone, but by choice, by shared experiences, and by the unwavering belief that love could heal even the deepest wounds. And as they continued to walk their path, they did so with the knowledge that they were not just rebuilding their lives, they were building something entirely new, something beautiful and enduring. Together, thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of love, resilience, and transformation. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt and inspiring narratives. We believe that sharing stories like these can bring light to others and remind us all of the power of second chances and the beauty of human connections. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share a quote or message that inspires you, something like, "I embrace the healing power of love and transformation in my life." Let's fill the comments with positivity and encouragement for everyone who's working through their own challenges. Make sure to check out our other videos and stay connected for more uplifting content. Together, we can continue to spread hope and remind others that even in the darkest times, love always finds a way. Thank you for being part of our community. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story.